From time immemorial, the sovereign nations have inhabited, protected, and preserved the land that is so-called Canada. We acknowledge this fact. The land we serve is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, and the Chippewa. Reelworld's offices are in Toronto, which is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit.
Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Sarah Ito, and I'm a curator and writer. I feel very honored to be in conversation with Laurie, Townshend, and Deena Alsaweer today. This panel is called How to Develop a Values-Informed Filmmaking Practice, and we're going to get into how these artistic practice is informed by their values, worldviews, and what that looks like in their filmmaking practice more generally. So we're going to hop right in. We're going to have a conversation, and then there'll be some time for a Q&A towards the end. So yeah. I'm going to just hop right in it. I would really love if you can introduce yourself. As you're introducing yourself, I'd really love if you could share about how you came into your filmmaking practice and what kind of creative impulses led you to filmmaking as a mode of storytelling. I don't want to volunteer anyone to go first, so if there's anyone that wants to start.
Why don't you go, Deena?
Yeah, I was going to say I could start.
I'll follow your lead.
Yeah. So hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this panel. So I'm Deena Alsaweer. I'm a film director. I do all the other things as a lot of us do, a lot of us filmmakers. And I would say that I'm a genre blending filmmaker. I love stories that infuse depth and boldness and humor and lightheartedness. And that is my kind of tool to be able to talk about what I think are really important subjects. And so my films will always be like a fun conversation with me. If you know me, you'll know watching my films is like being in a conversation with me. But if you take a second to read between the lines, there's always a little something there. I have my master's degree in film and television from SCAD as part of my Fulbright scholarship. And now I'm dedicating a large portion of my time and career to spotlighting authentic and interesting and joyful Arab characters. And I say the words Arab joy a lot, so people might be sick of me for saying that. And my latest film, Stitches, is all about finding joy in unexpected places. And I'm, as you might have guessed, it's about Arab joy. It's about Arab characters finding their joy in unexpected places. And yeah, was there a question in there too? I feel like we should do introduction, then question.
Yeah.
I'll be here all day.
Definitely follow up. But thank you so much for introducing yourself, and I'm so excited to get more into your work very soon. Laurie?
Hi. Yeah, thanks, Deena. Thanks for going first. And Sarah, thank you so much for this. Reelworld, this is amazing. I think you asked us to introduce ourselves and to also give a little bit of a sense of sort of how we got into this practice of filmmaking. I'm a middle school teacher, or have been in a former life, a middle school teacher for a couple decades. And while I was teaching the youth, I always felt like a bit of an imposter around storytelling, particularly in university before I became a teacher. I was in sciences, but had a love for storytelling. And I remember taking a intro to acting class in my last semester of my last year at the University of Guelph, and thought for a while that I wanted to be in front of the camera, but that was a short-lived thought. Fast forward to my teaching career, I found myself just, still enamored by storytelling. I was teaching drama and running film club and writing. And so I came to the practice of filmmaking through the act of writing, writing short scripts at first, and then, attempting to write a feature length script. And all the while, teaching my students full time, and really working with young people and hearing their stories and watching them go through the process of making films. So if we fast forward even more to 2021, that was the moment where A Mother Apart was sort of at the end of its development period, and we're going to get more into that because the development phase was lengthy, and yeah, there's a lot to talk about in terms of developing a feature-length documentary, but 2021 was the first year that I took a leave of absence from the classroom because there was no way I was going to be able to do both things, well, that is teaching and filmmaking. And here I am 3 years later, officially resigned as a teacher and full-time filmmaking with this baby that I've birthed into the world with the help of some amazing producers and amazing collaborators, and of course an amazing participant in the form of Stacey and Chin. So yeah, that's just a little bit of my journey and how I'm sitting here now as a early retired middle school teacher and full-time filmmaker. And I was also an emerging 20 at Reelworld. So I have to say, it feels very full circle. One of my former students, we'll get into it, but anyway, there are so many really beautiful full circle overlapping threads in my teaching and filmmaking journeys that it's fun to think about.
Thank you. Both of your journeys are so interesting and have weaved into such beautiful places, and I'm sure inform the way you go about your practice today. So both of you named your recent films, both released in 2024. Stitches, which premiered at Toronto Palestinian Film Festival, which we'll talk about in a second, and A Mother Apart, which premiered, had its world premiere at Hot Docs International Documentary Film Festival. And we'll go into kind of talking about and around these films without giving things away, but just to maybe kind of contextualize your making of the film and the kind of questions, the kind of ethical questions that you're thinking through. Deena, I'd love to start with, you spoke about joy and developing stories around joy and celebration and love, while also, holding the stark realities of Israelis' military occupation in Palestine. And so, without giving any spoilers, maybe you can just very briefly share the film for those who haven't yet to see it yet, which it's incredible. Can you kind of talk about maybe how you approach developing these kinds of stories in the midst of what we are in right now and what we are witnessing? Just from a creative perspective too.
I got you, Sarah. Thank you. And I'm so glad that you were able to watch the film, that you enjoyed it. So I appreciate that. Okay, spoiler-free description.
Yeah.
Stitches is about a joyful, like I told you guys, you're going to hear the words joy come out of my mouth a lot. But it's about a joyful Palestinian-Canadian dressmaker and his feisty niece who set out to defy a wedding dress ban by smuggling them as shisha packing paper. But yeah, so that's a little quirky kind of plan that the niece comes up with to cheer her uncle up. And remind me what the second part of the question was.
Yeah, I guess what kind of how do you approach creating stories about joy in the midst of just the realities of Israelis' military occupation, and how do you kind of craft those stories in a way that's careful but also honors, the fullness of people's lives?
Right. Yeah, that was one of my, if not the biggest challenge, because I talk a big game of we need more Arab joy in mainstream media. And so I wrote the first draft of the script, and it was all bubbly and fun, and it was a fun story, and it was great. But I just had this feeling in my heart that I was doing a disservice to the plight of of over it, or making it seem like a distant memory or something that's not really rooted in reality. So, and I didn't want to do something overtly political and traumatic, because again, I don't get excited about sitting down to watch a movie and relive traumas and see people that look like me and talk like me living traumatic experiences. And so I did what I do best, which is procrastinate, but with intentionality. So I took a couple of days, and I just kind of sat with that feeling of, what do I personally like on the smallest possible level in my heart? How does this make me feel? And the smallest part was kind of speaking pretty loudly. And it was kind of saying, it's hard to not feel hopeful and resilient in a way, because I don't know, I think that's just part of our culture. It's always inshallah, alhamdulillah, and it's always like there's always going to be a light at the end of the tunnel. So I took this tiny feeling and I put it in the movie, and it's a tiny part, but it feels real, like it's potent. And so I figured it out. And I had, I don't know, I had the characters kind of experience it, but bounce back from it in real time and in a very grounded human experience. I'm trying really hard not to give spoilers, but it's just like a showcase of an authentic story of a an Arab character, and how they kind of within themselves and within their minds reach in and, I don't know, like dig deep within themselves and figure out a way to just be normal and be joyful again. So that's what I did. And again, and because I really wanted to, again, I didn't want to disregard the tragedy, right? And so most of the movie is really quirky, upbeat, fun. There's so much Arabic music, or there's so much music inspired by Arabic instruments and phrasing in the music and how it's played and the melodies. And it's just so many layers of all the little details of Arabic culture, And I think that's the fact that the movie starts that way and is the magnet that kind of sucks all the other elements together. It makes the trauma feel like a part of something big, and it doesn't overtake the entire character's existence, if that makes sense. So the trauma doesn't define the character's experience. Yeah, that does make sense.
Yeah, and I think you do that so beautifully, because at a time when representation of a particular set of people is really intensely dehumanizing, I think it is so important to create narratives of like fuller lives of people's like everydays, and intimacy and family, and I think joy and like tragedy kind of get pitted against like they seem like they're kind of on the opposite ends of each other, but I think they're actually really quite intertwined, and I think yeah, that they
Absolutely.
can't be separate. Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah, I feel like they can't be separate in a way too.
Oh no. Pain and love, I think, always coincide at varying levels, of course. It doesn't always have to be completely the end of everything all at once. But yeah, I feel like I was going to go on a huge tangent, but I decided against it.
Thank you. Yeah, and for I think some of these themes also resonate, like kind of the like joy and pains and sorrows, in a mother apart. And again, Laurie, I'm gonna ask if you can do like a spoiler-free kind of telling of the film. But I'm gonna like maybe touch on some of the themes that it talks about, you know. It really deals with sensitive themes around like family estrangement and abandonment. And I'm wondering in a documentary genre, what did trust building look like with your collaborators in the film? In kind of preparing for this conversation, you also spoke about consent in the filmmaking process, and I'd love to like hear you, you know, ideate on that a bit more with us.
Yeah, well, you said it. Trust was really the basis for this story, and you know, developing trust with Stacey Ann, the main participant, and her daughter Zuri, who was 5.5 when I first met them. Zuri's now 12. Definitely, it was, you know, the thing that sort of underpins this whole process. I heard of Stacey Ann Chin through her memoir writing. She did a big book tour back in Toronto back in 2008, because she has such a large readership and fan base in New York, where she's based, as well as Toronto. There are a whole bunch of queer Jamaicans in Toronto. Not that that's her only her only audience. Her work has transcended, you know, and has been out there. So I knew of her work. When I became interested in telling the story about mother activism, I knew that I wanted to reach out to her, and thankfully we had a mutual friend in a woman named Raquel Bremer. Thank you, Raquel, for putting me in touch with Stacey Ann. That was many years ago. So yeah, I made the trek to New York on a March break. Like I mentioned, I was teaching full time, and I took my March break and went down on a megabus with my DSLR camera and met Stacey Ann and Zuri for the first time. And it was really just a meeting of two queer women with Jamaican moms, you know, and very different experiences. My Jamaican mom didn't leave me as an infant. My Jamaican mom didn't make her way to Montreal and then to Germany, and you know, she didn't traipse across the world or across the globe, you know, apart, away from her daughter. That was Stacey Ann's experience. And so this film is really about that early separation, that estrangement that you mentioned, but it's also about the beautiful ways in which Stacey Ann has turned the trauma of that abandonment into an art form in the way that she mothers her own daughter. And I say this in describing the film, you know, Stacey Ann has become the mother she always needed in a lot of ways. And that to me is a miracle. Deena mentioned the word potency, the potency of the joy. I was really struck by the potency of this love, this presence. You know, in a lifetime of absence or separation from a mom, Stacey Ann has cultivated this beautiful presence with her daughter, and it shows up in the way that she looks at her, just the gaze, the way she delights in her, the way that she plays and wrestles even, you know. We know that that mother-daughter relationship can be intense sometimes. And even, you know, this little girl who's developing her own sense of who she is in the world, Stacey Ann has always left room for that to emerge. She's actually encouraged it. So these are all the things that I started to witness as I spent time with the family. And we had many conversations, Stacey Ann and I, about what it is to be, you know, the daughters of Jamaican moms who have their own stories, their own experiences of being mothered or not mothered, or being parented or not parented. And, the context of the Caribbean, the context of Jamaica specifically, it has a way of shaping, the values and the approaches to mothering. And so through those conversations, it was really just through those deep dialogues that we developed a trust, and that Stacey Ann, this person who spent so much of her time and her work telling her own story, like I mentioned, by way of her memoir, her off-Broadway play Motherstruck, which was all about, her decision to create a family on her own, looking for sperm, and this sort of like almost comedic search for sperm that she was on. She did a beautiful one woman play called Motherstruck. She's used to telling her own story, and she's never given that over to somebody. So I realized that this was a huge thing for her to trust me, to tell her story, this part of her story in this way. And that just developed over the course of, I would say, a couple years at least, before, we were into production, and, COVID happened as well. But yeah, we spent a lot of time in conversation and just communing, and getting to know each other.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like that relationship seems felt even in the viewing of it. I'm wondering if you could share a bit what that looked like with the inclusion of a child too, because I think that also, I love the way consent shows up in the film, even within even with the way, yeah, she raises her daughter. And I wonder if that how that looks like when filming with someone who's younger.
Yeah, I obviously defer to Stacey Ann, Zuri's mother, and we had conversations early on about, what this meant or what this might mean. I mean, nobody knows. Stacey Ann has said, Zuri inevitably, like most kids, will end up, talking about me, the mother, in therapy someday. And it's sort of like this leap of faith, a mother's instinct. It's knowing your child. It's doing right by her and doing the best you can. We had a moment, I can share an anecdote, in an early shoot. So Stacey Ann and Zuri have done these sort of two-hander, a program on YouTube. You can look it up. It's called Living Room Protest, and they feature, we sort of pepper in a few of these living room protests in the film, because there are these beautiful dialogues that she started doing with Zuri when Zuri was only 3 years old, and wanted to go to this protest, but she was sick. And so she said, "Mom, why don't we record ourselves and saying what we feel about I think it was a Mike Brown rally that she wanted to go to." She was like, "Why don't we record ourselves and send it to people who might disagree with us?" And so Stacey Ann, started this thing with her daughter, and it's been, there are upwards of 90 episodes of this little program. So there was this moment in filming in our production where we wanted to record Zuri and Stacey Ann doing one of their living room protests. And I think this was around 2019. Yeah, it was just before COVID, 2018, 2019. And so we're in their apartment in New York, and they're setting up the way they always do for these living room protests that they've done a million times together, but without a camera crew sort of watching them. And at one point, Zuri's talking about whatever the topic was. I think it was about losing teeth or something. And their topics range from school ground politics to, police should do the right thing, to things that Zuri wants to talk about. So she's talking about this thing, and Stacey Ann makes a mistake or something, and Zuri got really upset on camera. She was like, "But Mom, why did you say that?" And she's kind of whispering to her, and she had a bit of a meltdown. And she walked off to her room really upset, and Stacey Ann was like, "Okay, stop filming." She went to go sit with her and talk with her. And that later on that afternoon, Stacey Ann and I had a really great heart to heart. She was just like, you could see her grappling with whether or not this was a good thing. She's like, we do these living room protests all the time. She never has meltdowns like that. She doesn't, if we make mistakes, we just start over again, you know? And so she was questioning in front of me whether or not saying yes to this film and including Zuri was a good thing. And I sat there with a little bit of fear in my heart, because of course I'm thinking, you know, like consent the reason it's called consent is because it can be taken back, it can be reversed, it can be, you know, withheld. And she had every right to say, you know what, Laurie, this isn't going to work. I don't think we should be doing this. Let's be done. So I'm not going to lie, I was a little bit nervous as I watched her and sat with her grappling with whether or not this was a good thing for her daughter. And in real time, she's sitting there and she said, you know what, I want her to know that failing is okay, and that you can like, she wanted to really engender that resilience. And she was convinced and said to me in that moment that this was something that she felt would help with that, you know, and that we were doing it in community. And by this time, she knows me. She knows everyone that I've brought into her world, you know, whether it be the camera person that we handpicked, or, you know, the thoughtful care we put into which sound person was going to be, you know, accompanying us on international shoots. Like, these are the things that she trusted me with. And this is where trust really came to the surface. And so, yeah, I just, that idea of consent and the idea that we were including a minor, you know, and that Zuri was as much a part of this story as Stacey Ann is. We're talking about mothering. We're talking about the ways in which Stacey Ann has turned mothering into this art form, in my opinion. I can't imagine the film without Zuri, and I'm just so glad that the trust was there, and that Stacey Ann's mothering and her instincts, you know, were always they were always at the fore. And, you know, Zuri might 20 years from now look at this film and be like, oh, why did you include me? But she's going to be able to have the conversation. She's going to know, based on the things her mother says on camera, based on the conversations that we've had, all the back channel conversations, she's going to know that decisions were made with her best interest in mind. Ways in which she shows up in this film is like the beating heart of this film is just such a beautiful, beautiful thing that we're all proud of. And I think Zuri will be really proud of when she sees it when she's older.
I think she will. How old is she now?
She's 12. She'll be 13 in January. Yeah.
She's a baby in the documentary.
Yeah. I mean, between the archival, like I said, those living room protests that started when she was 3, like if you go to living room protest #1, she's literally, she can barely say her name. You know, this is Stacey Ann and Zuri. And so you see her growing up on camera, and then like our production footage starts in 2018 and goes to 2023.
I think she's going to really appreciate that.
Yeah, like as you're saying, mothering as an art form, it also, to me, is like a practice. It's like a practice that you're doing in real time. And I was wondering about the ways that like it mirrored your own kind of practice and the kind of ethical questions and the creative decisions that you're grappling with. And thank you for sharing more about your films and, you know, kind of laying more of the context of how you're entering this conversation in 2024 post these beautiful releases. Before we kind of switch gears a little bit, I wanted to kind of I wanted to ask about how the political climate shaped how you approached these films. Like it could be, you know, direct or indirect. We've kind of talked about it a little bit, but like what was happening in the world, or like I know like the movement for Black Lives was was really at center stage when maybe you were making this film, and the apartheid and genocide in Gaza is very, you know, it's taking it, there's a lot happening with that right now. So I'm wondering what kind of decisions did you make around how much you wanted to engage that in your work, or because these are, you know, deeply personal stories, but they're very much shaped by its political and economic conditions. So just wondering how you engage that, or what decisions you made around that.
Yeah, for me, I took a really good look at the people around me and the things that I was seeing online, social media specifically. And I live in Canada now, and so there's a wider range of people from different backgrounds. And I was privy to a lot of conversations that I might have not been um, able to hear if I was still living back home in the Middle East. And so it really opened my eyes, and I thought, this is really the perspective that we're working with. It almost, I really had to look at my movie and think, how does this fit within the conversations that I'm hearing right now where I am? And so a lot of the things I was hearing were very ridiculous. And so the main plot of the movie, which is to conceal or disguise wedding dresses as shisha packing paper, is, in my eyes, equally ridiculous, or a bit less ridiculous than some of the things I heard. And so I really wanted to give that feeling of absurdity in my movie, because, I mean, first of all, but we deserve more than just conflict-driven narratives. There's a fullness of our culture, and I really wanted to find a fair and honest and authentic balance between the two. And it's almost like a showcase of, here are the actual people that you're talking about. All the things and the facts and the statistics that you're saying or talking about or discussing or disputing, forget that for a second. But these are the people that you are talking about and thinking about. Have they ever been really visualized in your mind? You know what I mean? As real people, as a person who looks a certain way, talks a certain way, has a job, has a life, has quirks and personality quirks and things like that. And so to me, my approach was, if, again, I said we deserve more than just conflict-driven narratives. So if you wanted to see people experiencing conflict and tragedy, you can turn the news on. You can watch the news. I didn't want to add to the zeitgeist more of that, you know, just miserable narrative. And I really wanted to show the nuance of our culture and our values and our, yeah, I mean, and it's set in Canada. The movie is set in Canada for a very specific reason, because I've noticed and I've experienced, and I really admire this about Arabs objectively. So I've seen that Arabs have a really unique way of preserving our traditional values and culture, while also, while simultaneously evolving with the times. And that's something that I wanted to really showcase, because obviously the characters, they speak English, they dip in and out of English and Arabic, but it's the little details that I wanted to focus on, like extending a cup of tea, like extending a little piece of kindness to someone, whether or not you know them. Strangers, family, and friends are all treated alike for Arabs. I mean, I think a lot of people can agree that we're kind of known for our hospitality. Force feeding and things like that. I know a lot of cultures share that as well. And so, yeah, I the way I approached that was, I really wanted to focus on the small moments within the larger narrative. And I think that was at that time, for me, the perfect way to show a reflection of how us as a people, that's what our resilience looks like. Our resilience does look like joy. It does look like laughing in the face of tragedy. And that you can also see on the news, I think, or well, I've seen on TikTok news. But yeah, I just really wanted to focus on how we navigate these complexities with humor and grace. And life in general is made up of these small moments. So I don't think, to me, this notion cannot be disputed, and it can only be accepted and celebrated.
Yeah, and I think even like subverting too, because it's all centering around this ban of the circulation of products, and but there's like there's like kind of concealing and like the culture still goes on, it's still held, it's still preserved, and I think you do that really well in like acknowledging the actual kind of political climate, but like that does not stop anything.
Exactly, it doesn't stop. It must continue, and
Mhm.
you see like the main character Karim, he experiences this horrible like inner turmoil, and gets up the next day. What does he do? He opens his dress shop again.
Mhm.
He deals with customers still. He's still the same nice person that he always has been, but you can just see and you can feel that this is in the back of his mind, and it's kind of changed his his inner world a little bit. But I do want to just add a quick fact that the wedding dress ban, although it is a really absurd and ridiculous part of my movie, and it makes it quirky, and I love quirkiness, and it is also a fact. Wedding dresses are in fact banned from entering Palestine, along with a really weird list of other items. Um, I'll just say off the top of my head, I think I saw cilantro, chocolate, um, baby bottles, and a bunch of other general household items. But yeah, and then I think this is one of those things where we didn't have time to film all the things that we had planned to film, but the niece character does walk in with a bar of chocolate, and she's eating it the entire time that they're kind of watching the news. It's still in there, but if you didn't catch it the first time, you will now. So I really wanted to say that.
Love that. Thank you. And yeah, and Laurie, like, how did the political climate influence your approach to making A Mother Apart? What was happening at the time, and how did it? Yeah, I'll leave it there.
So much.
Mhm.
Wow. So the phrase "the political is personal, the personal is political" keeps coming to me.
Mm.
I don't think there's any notion or concept that sort of encapsulates where I was at the time of deciding to make a film about mother activism. On a personal note, I was contemplating having a child because I am a queer woman. That would mean a whole bunch of logistics. It meant a whole bunch of things like fertility treatments and looking for sperm and yada, yada, yada. This is happening within me as outside of me is, the ongoing assault and violence on Black bodies. And so the Black Lives Matter movement was really, it was just in 2018, 2019, I was attending rallies and activations within Toronto and, always with my camera. And I started to tune into the women, the mothers. I started noticing lots of parents, but mostly mothers on the front lines or in the mix with their kids. And because of the personal questioning that was happening within me, I think I just became more attuned to what was happening outside of me and started speaking with these moms, making street photography, having, conversations about why they chose to attend rallies and community gatherings with their children. And I couldn't help but think like, okay, so if I do end up becoming a mom to like my own biological child, is this the kind of mom I want to be? Right? Would I be on the front lines with these women? And I hate you to invoke like war terminology, front lines. I just, it was about women, mothers showing up in community in these political spaces. And so that was part of what I was grappling with. I was asking these questions about what kind of mother I might be. I was also very much like inspired and convinced that these children being in such community and like politically charged environments, I was just really, really excited about what this would mean for our future, like for the future of us as a society, because I was like, little girls like Zuri who are growing up to know that they have like that their words and their presence and their voices matter. Just think about what kind of a young person she's going to be, like a teenager. Just think about what kind of a 25-year-old she's going to be. Like I could see the patriarchy just trembling in its boots based on what I was witnessing here with these young people. So all of these things were happening in 2018, 2019 for me. And that was the context with which I wrote the treatments, the first couple treatments for A Mother Apart. It was actually called Mothering in the Movement at the time. So very much about the personal and the political. It was very much about, how a mother embodies the political, and just by virtue of pushing against the status quo is making a political statement. And not to mention, one of the first books I started reading for research was edited by the scholar Alexis Pauline Gumbs. It's called Revolutionary Mothering, and that's full of essays about mothers who are queering the idea of motherhood, communities that are expanding definitions of motherhood. So there are all these threads of, I would say, experiences that were informed by the adage, the personal is political, the political is personal. And that's what really drove me and inspired me in the early days of creating this documentary. And although, Mothering in the Movement, whereby we were following about 4 mother activists, Stacey Ann was just one of them. There were actually 3 other mothers who, through the development process, said yes to us sort of like following them and trying to figure out if, what aspect of their story was going to be part of the film. Stacey Ann was one of the 4, and just throughout the different process and different things happening in these women's lives, her Stacey Ann's story became the salient story. It became the one that had sort of like a bit of a clock attached to it, because her mother, kind of went off grid during COVID, and she didn't know where she was. And we knew that there was going to be some element of her going to search for her mother yet again. And although that's not the main part, it's not the main engine of the film, we knew it was going to be part of it. So yeah, like there's just, from the early days of making this film, the political was always part of it, and it was always personal, and it remains that way. Stacey Ann is an activist who has been speaking out for those whose voices, would otherwise be silenced. I won't say the voiceless, because none of us are voiceless, but those who are deliberately silenced. And Stacey Ann has been on the forefront of that forever. And the way that she mothers, the way that she makes space for Zuri's voice to emerge is just, it's a template that she, it's a pattern of, it's the way that she moves through the world. And that's really what the film captures,
Wow, that's incredible. It's so incredible to learn about the kind of backstory of how that was developed, and the focus that it puts on, like, families and, the intergenerational nature of community gatherings. Sometimes it could be so heavily focused on like the people in their 20s, the university students and stuff like that. And it's not, it's a lot more holistic of like a broader community, and community doesn't look one way. And so yeah, I really love that focus. I'm going to begin asking more about the kind of ways that you approach funding your projects, or maybe the kind of the producers that you've worked with, or how you go about resourcing projects that do deal with like these more, hard, like not hard, but like, I guess, more directly dealing with political matters, or or implicitly, but yeah, how do you go about approaching these kinds of projects that that do deal with sensitive themes? Anyone can go first, to as much as your knowledge set is about that too.
I can go.
Mhm.
Laurie, does that go with you? So yeah, I'm the type of filmmaker, I love making fun movies, and so I was a little nervous about taking on such a, such a heavy topic and really important narrative. And outside of that, I was also hyper aware of who my collaborators could be. I just felt I yeah, I just felt very cautious of everyone that I was approaching, and very cautious of, like, I put out a crew call, a casting call, and I was just petrified that someone would reply to my email in the call with just, you know, something that would traumatize me for a change. So I it was a really yeah, so that was a direction that I never thought that I would take. However, um, again, like, I just wanted to really show the beauty and the joyful side of our experience, just as a people. And so the funding came from a film residency, the Toronto Palestine Film Residency, and the producer was actually the set designer. And every time he had a question for me about location, and he didn't quite like it, he was like, I read the script and it's just not giving me this location is not giving me the feeling of the script. And he said, I'm also a producer and I can come on board. And I thought that was actually kind of miraculous, but that was one of many, many beautiful and sweet moments that I've experienced, on and off screen. Um, so many different people from different backgrounds were extremely supportive and dedicated to this project and to making it successful. Everyone from the person from the bridal boutique that we got the wedding dresses from, to the person whose dress shop that we actually filmed in. And it was just so heartwarming. And I mean, you guys know, Laurie, Sarah, you know, it's for filmmakers, we're very susceptible to feeling defeated at like it could be at the end of every single shoot day. But you come back, right? You pull yourself together, you come back. And for the first time, right, I would feel defeated, and within 5 minutes there would be a huge community behind me supporting me and, picking up the pieces so we can keep going. And so it was a really positive experience, and I think it's a little miraculous, because Stitches is about community. Stitches is the plot, the movie, the characters. It's about unexpected camaraderie and unexpected acts of kindness. And there were many unexpected acts of kindness in the making of Stitches. And yeah, and it's very opposite to what I was very nervous about before starting production. And so, yeah, so funding came from TPFF, and also my mom made the catering. My mom cooked all the food. So I think that also helped with the crew and cast being extra generous, because they were very full with lots of amazing Arabic food, Middle Eastern food. That's the trick, honestly. That's the secret sauce to filmmaking.
Yes. Sorry, Laurie, you can go right ahead and I'll add thoughts after.
Sure. Yeah. I just, this is where you shout out your producers. Oya Media Group, headed up by Alison Duke and Gadi Conte George, were the first to say yes. And yes to me and the NFB. So this is going back to 2017. just before Oya was formed, actually. And Allison, I had worked on, she was executive producer on a series of shorts that she asked 5 women to direct. It was the Akua Benjamin series of films. Gaddy was one of those filmmakers. It's just, now that I think about all the, the ways in which our lives kind of intertwined before this. Yeah, Allison was the first to sort of like say yes and hear this, let's do a film about Black mother activists. Yes. Leah Marin, who was at the NFB at the time, was the second person to say yes. And because of that, I got accepted to the NFB's Investigate program, they call it the Investigate. It's just, a period of time to develop the story. I guess I call it pre-development. And because of that, we were kind of in the fold of the NFB, and then Oya soon formed after that. And, the way that, the persistence of applying for different purses, different envelopes, and working through tax credits. Like, I obviously, this was my first feature length film. Before this, I had self-financed and did crowdfunding for my my narrative short back in 2011, 2012. So I didn't have experience navigating the ins and outs of Canadian tax credits, and, the CMF, were incredibly supportive. But all this was, in the hands of my producers, who, by the way, for the most part, I mean, women of color, mothers, or queer, because Justine Pimlott, who took over when Leah left the NFB, she was amazing. Yeah, I just had an amazing sort of core group of women who understood the importance of this story and understood that there had never been a documentary like this before. Certainly not one that was produced or co-produced by the NFB in their canon of amazing documentaries. And they also understood, obviously, the business of filmmaking, and were able to, like, I could focus on, co-writing with Allison and directing and forming this relationship with Stacey Ann and maintaining that. COVID happened. We were all navigating that for the first time, and, being able to organize and find remote shoots, and, leaning on our different relationships. This business of filmmaking is all about relationships at the end of the day. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot from my producers, and just, the circumstances of COVID really just put constraints on us that forced us to be creative. And sometimes you're footing the bill, for a shoot, or you're going down with a real skeleton kind of crew, and just making it happen. And so a lot of that is, I guess it's a little bit less nebulous, like when it's a scripted film that has, a certain number of shoot days that are set in stone. This was 6.5 years of cobbling together resources at different times, deferring, and making investments, and writing applications and getting rejected from, different sources of funds. And then, eventually, getting that big yes. And that was in 2021, when the CMF was just like, we want to support this, and we want to see this character on screen. It was a beautiful, beautiful acceptance letter. I actually had parts of it printed and up in my office, because it was so validating. But I'll leave it at that. It was definitely like finding a good producer or producers who understand you creatively, but also obviously know the business side of things, and who are going to really advocate for you and push and get creative themselves, is really key for making films in Canada.
I fully agree. That's been my experience as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so we have like about 6 minutes left for Q&As, and I also have a closing question. So we're going to do like a bit of a lightning round. There's some questions that have come in.
Okay.
So yeah. One of the first questions from the Q&A, thank you folks for sending in some questions. Someone asked, I'm curious about the way your current projects have shifted how you might approach subjects for docs or even actors in scripted works going forward. And that's from Samara Hassan.
That's a really great question.
Yeah. So, yeah.
I'll just say for me, for docs, it's, you know, forming a relationship, being vulnerable, I think is really important. I think this is sort of how I approach teaching as well, to show up fully as myself and to offer that vulnerability first. If you're asking somebody to open up and to give you access to their lives and their worlds and their innermost thoughts, I think you kind of have to show up as that authentic, open, vulnerable being yourself. And it worked for me in the classroom. There are fewer places as you know, just charged emotionally as a middle school classroom with people feeling insecure and maybe not sure of who they are and what they are doing there. And, you know, as a teacher, that was just always what I led with, that sort of vulnerability. I'm going to tell you about my fears first, or I'm going to show you, you know, that I'm as nervous about the first day of school as you might be, no matter how many times I do it. That's my approach to working with building relationships with anybody. And so I think that has to happen in the case of participants in a doc, and that will continue to inform how I work from here on out.
I agree with the vulnerability part. I think for me, I had really good conversations with my actors, and they're so amazingly talented, and they're really quick. I think moving forward, I would have more just intimate conversations, because I explained where I was coming from very well, but I think it would have been a lot better if, not would have been a lot better, but just more powerful if I was just, you know, just vulnerable with them. Like, here, like, this is exactly how I felt when I wrote this line, and this is why I felt that, and this is, you know. So I think conversations, just honest and vulnerable conversations with your actors, always going to be a huge benefit.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. I'm just going to keep pushing along to get as many in. Another question. Thanks for your important work. Has the process of securing funding distribution for your films been different to previous films you've created in the past? I know you spoke on it a little bit, but maybe if you want to just maybe elaborate how funding or distribution has looked different from project to project.
Well, yeah, I mentioned the funding for my first short, A Rail Path Hero. This is actually, I brought this to, it was what I was part of the Emerging 24 back in 2011, I think it was, or 2012. I crowdfunded and had independent investors' family and my own credit card. I think that was like a $18,000 budget. A lot more than I realized a 9-minute film would cost back in the day. So yeah, this definitely for a feature documentary, the funding model was different. And yeah, I in the past, I've also applied for grants for different projects. I've received Canada Council and Ontario Council of the Arts grants, OAC grants. Yeah, and then distribution, very much different as well. When you have a broadcaster attached to a feature, you know that it's going to eventually have its audience on, you know, and for us with the Mother Part, it's Doc Channel. With my short films in the past, they've had different festival runs. But yeah, feature is very different, and I continue to learn a lot about it. Yeah, I'm excited about the possibilities and the impact. We didn't really even get into that, but like taking a film like a feature or even a short and having a whole other life after its festival run and getting it into different, you know, through distribution, getting it into different environments like academic environments or community centers. This is all, we could have a whole other panel just on that and what the impact of a film might be. And I think it's worth mentioning, but yeah, can't really get into it in detail.
Deena, did you want to speak to this as well?
No, not really. I'll keep it short and sweet.
Okay. Yeah, because we don't have much time.
Okay.
Yes, we did want to talk like more about distribution as well as audiences and what it's been like being in the first year of sharing this work with your audiences. But yeah, maybe another panel could be set up to continue this for part 2.
Yeah.
It is about to be 1 p.m. And so I just want to say thank you so much for all the, knowledge and experiences and wisdoms you shared about what it's like with your film practice and the recent films that you have put out in the world. And just, thank you so much. I've learned so much in this past hour, and I'm sure folks have as well. And thank you everyone for joining. Thank you so much, Reelworld and Sifia, for organizing. I'm not sure how a digital panel closes, but imagine people are like,
You've been amazing. This has been I can't believe how quickly this hour went.
I know. I'm like, we need another hour.
Yeah, I think the conversation about your film, the film that you made, is like, it's almost, if not more important than the actual film sometimes. So I hope we all get to continue talking about our films, because I know there's a lot to be said.
Yes, and please go see the films whenever they are out, wherever I know they are circulating. And I'm really excited for audiences to be introduced to your films.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. And thank you, Reelworld. Shout out to Natalie Nadine, my former student, who I know is working like crazy behind the scenes at Reelworld. It's just such a joy to be to have that background as a teacher, but then to be in this world and to encounter my students and doing amazing things. And I'm really blessed.
You're talking that talk and you're walking that walk for sure for your students.
Thank you.
I'll say a quick shout out to my old childhood friend who I had a dream about and then messaged me and then designed stitches.
Wow, that's so cool. I was wondering about who created that. I love the poster.
Yeah, Manal Ali. I hadn't seen her or thought of her in 15 years. And then, like I said, had a dream about her, and she messaged me, and then we ended up with this amazing collaboration. These are stickers that we've made for giveaways for our fundraising campaign. And so the world of community support continues for Stitches, for sure.
Very much so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we leave?
Bye, virtual world.